practical TTK, mostly as it applies to snipers, but really as it applies to all weapons. Practical TTK on a sniper from recent testing that I've done is about 400 milliseconds. And that is both from my own gameplay and also from enemies, sniping me, just judging by when they're ADS. This is from when you're ADS, so this doesn't include the ADS time. So realistically, if you've got a short ADS time of like 0.15 seconds or something like that, then you're looking about a 0.55, 550 millisecond practical TTK on a sniper rifle. These adjustments like that one right there take time. And that's part of your TTK. So sniper rifles don't actually have a faster TTK than, a lot of weapons, like a fusion rifle that has charge time. And that's interesting. For a human player that has to aim, snipers don't have an advantage over something like a fusion rifle. So why use one? Well, I think the answer is that you don't. And I think a lot of players don't unless they're in a game mode. I think I just recently was listening to Cammy Cakes talking about not using snipers in game modes that he cares about, right? Like even people who are good with snipers don't use them in game matches where they care about their accuracy unless they have someone to cover them. That's different too. Like if your teammate can set you up, that's different. But if you have to carry, you're not going to use a sniper rifle because there's no advantage, because the practical TTK is half a second, which isn't that different. And here's the problem with the practical TTK of a sniper rifle. With a hand cannon, even if the practical TTK is longer, I'm less worried about flinch. A nice stable hand cannon, I can be flinched and still pull off a pretty optimal TTK, optimal practical TTK. Maybe I'm peak shotting or something like that, but I'm landing 3 successive headshots or whatever, or 2 successive headshots, whatever the case is, with minimal exposure time. So if you take my exposed time, subtract peak time, right, and then factor that as your TTK, you've got an optimal TTK with a hand cannon, and I can do that while being flinched. It's not a big deal. On a sniper rifle, if I get flinched, it's almost impossible to hit that shot. You're going to be so unreliable with it that it's not worth it. Look at me try to shoot through this flinch here. It's insane. Now, once I'm not flinched, yeah, I can pop up and land a jump shot and snap him out of the air, but I could have killed him easier with a hand cannon in that fight, more reliably with a hand cannon in that fight. So not only do you have a practical TTK that's equal to other weapons that are easier to use, but if you don't land that shot in that practical, if you don't hit the ideal TTK, you have no TT. Like it's infinite. Like you have to have optimal TTK or you get nothing. I think the weapon archetype is broken for human players. The only players that can use snipers because of the flinch mechanic are cheaters, to be frank, to be honest, because they're the only ones who can actually get a TTK advantage because they don't have the same amount of aim time as a human player. That's important. Flinch, which was added to nerf sniper rifles, probably only made the weapon impractical for human players. The most cracked out players that were hardest to deal with when it came to sniper rifles were likely people who were using Aimbots or some sort of aim assistance mechanism. And those players are not affected by flinch because they're getting the shots in less time than you can flinch them. So flinch really hurts the honest players and basically classes them out of the weapon and leaves the weapon only usable in a reliable sense by cheaters. Cheaters are able to execute a 200 millisecond or less TTK from the time that they ADS, and they can do it consistently. They can do it 100% of the time. A human player might be able to do that once if they happen to ADS and have it right on your head, and maybe they, clicked before they really even realized they were ready to click. They're going to be able to execute that once in a while and get lucky. But a top tier cheater is going to be able to do that 100% of the time in 200 to 300 milliseconds from ADS, right? I've got some clips showing kind of what that looks like. There was one player who was hitting optimal TTKs with his submachine gun, and then also from ADS to shot had a 200 millisecond response, round trip time, like 200 milliseconds total time between when we see the red reticle and when the shot is fired. Now, yeah, there's network delay there, but there should be network delay on both of those events. So looking at it from my side as the client perspective, that should mean that it was 200 milliseconds from when he ADS'd to when he pulled the trigger. That does not give him really human time to even react to where I am in his ADS scope, which was a fair amount downrange. So it's unlikely that I would have been dead center in his scope. Even if I was, he still has to realize that I'm dead center and then pull the trigger, which should have at least 100, if not 200 milliseconds response time. And that's what I'm talking about, is when I'm seeing players that don't feel like they're cheating, those players, even when I slide right into the center of their scope, are still taking about 400 milliseconds from the time I see their reticle to when I feel the shot. And that feels fast, but it feels fair. Basically, the difference is seeing the red reticle and knowing that you're effed and dying versus dying and then seeing the red reticle, right? That's kind of the difference of how it feels. So you basically have that human response time, even if you don't need to make an aim adjustment. And then you still have a few milliseconds of human time if the human has to make any kind of a micro adjustment. And the further you are off target, the longer that takes. And it can go up to 600, 700 milliseconds if you're way off target to make that adjustment. At that range, you're going to be flinched. So you're only going to be able to use the sniper when you catch enemies off guard, which is not something that's going to happen consistently. And so it just makes the weapon not consistent. So I would almost say, if you want to try and create the weapon or modify the weapon in such a way that cheaters can't take advantage of it, then what you should actually do is put a minimum latency between ADS and fire time, kind of like a fusion rifle. I would almost say pull snipers out of the game and use linear fusions. One thing that you could do, though, instead of having like a hold and release type of a mechanism, is just have a minimum fire time from ADS. Like once you ADS, there's like 100, 150 millisecond minimum shot time, right? Which for a player who has to aim, it won't affect them. So what does TTK of 500 milliseconds mean to a human player? If you have to eat flinch, what does that look like? It looks like this. Right? It looks like this. Right? It looks like this. That's what sniping really looks like for human players 90% of the time. Because you can't shoot through flinch with a sniper rifle. The way that Bungie has crafted the weapon is it's not usable for humans in most engagements, where you're going to be taking shots from weapons that are quicker to get that first shot off and easier to aim. I'm not sure that is fair to the human players. They've created a weapon that is dominant for cheaters and not really viable for humans. It also sort of forces you to set unrealistic expectations for yourself, to feel like you could be a top sniper. But I'm promising you, promise is too strong of a word. I can tell you that even looking not just at myself, but at the snipers who are defeating me occasionally, that they are not hitting me in less than 400 milliseconds unless they're playing at 100% consistency. Now, the players that are beating me in less than 400 milliseconds from the ADS are also players who are getting optimal TTKs on subs and doing all this while being highly mobile. They are not missing a shot. I believe they are aimbotting at that point. Players that feel like they're human, feel like that they're, aiming, they're occasionally missing shots, right? Those players are also not hitting you in less than 400 milliseconds from the ADS. So what's my point? My point is, don't use snipers. Don't bother. they're not built for us anymore. I think a way to fix this Bungie idea, 300 millisecond minimum time from ADS to shot, and remove the flinch or reduce it. Make it so that if you have anti-flinch gear, it's manageable. Not remove it entirely necessarily, but make it so that if you've got like tier 10 resilience and strong anti-flinch, you should be able to shoot through it, and not in a luck of the draw sort of way where you just occasionally accidentally get flinched up into a headshot, right? But like in a way where you could consistently shoot through it if you've maxed out for sniping all of your anti-flinch gear, as long as you're holding for that 300 milliseconds to get that shot. Actually, a better strategy might be that you can fire in less than 300 milliseconds, but the shot won't actually fire until at least 300 milliseconds has passed. The shot will delay until it's been 300 milliseconds, and then it'll fire. And then as long as you're still on target, it'll hit. And then basically you have to keep the reticle on target until it actually fires. So you push the trigger, and then you got to make sure and keep that reticle on target, because I don't actually care. I don't actually care if the enemy has perfect aimbot aim. I can deal with that. I can cope with cheaters in the sandbox. If they have 100% aim, what I can't cope with is having subhuman response times. So just put a threshold that we demarcate as human response time. Call it 100 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds if you want. And if shots are coming in less than them, block it. Easiest anti-cheat in the world. Puts cheaters on a human playing field. They're still going to be better than most humans when they're running an aimbot, but they're manageable. They're manageable, right? I think 300 milliseconds is fair. Honestly, you may have players who can do a full round trip, see, react, and execute in less than that. But they're still going to be hitting their shots, right? And we get to nuke the cheaters. But make that flinch manageable, right? Make this something that you can work with. Because that's insane. That flinch right there is insane. It's half of my field of view. And we got lucky there and landed that flinch shot, but that's not going to happen most of the time. So factor in aim practical TTK to your weapon when you're making your weapon selection as a human, and understand that aimbotters don't have that compromise. So you're going to be facing weapons that you can't match, and it's not because you're not good enough. It's because they're inhuman. Now, accuracy is interesting. We want to talk about accuracy here. Accuracy, when people see accuracy on snipers and they see like 90% accuracy as a percentage of kills, where the higher percentage of their kills were headshots, and they say, well, it just means that they waited to shoot on the head more. And that's kind of the point, is yes, but no. The reason why you're likely to be able to identify a cheater by their accuracy is not by the accuracy alone, but by the fact that they never felt inclined to give up on the headshot and go for a body or swap weapons. That's the issue there, is that they were confident enough that they would be able to get that reticle lined up for the headshot 90% of the time, that they didn't bother swapping or giving up and going for a body shot. And that in that lack of panic, that lack of fear, that lack of anxiety, it shows something, right? It shows that they were very confident that they would be able to get their headshot before they got flinched. And that was true 90+% of the time. What would give you that kind of confidence to take your time and go for the headshot, knowing full well that one flinched round in you is enough to put you off? Well, an aimbot, right? An aimbot gives you that kind of confidence. So when you see 90+% accuracy, there's a percentage of headshot accuracy where it actually, for a human player, shows less skill, because it shows that they're taking too much, they're too committed to the headshot, right? And my guess is, much like we've seen in some of these videos that I've got for you here, the higher percentage of their engagements, the ones that they're not showing you in their clips, right, are losses because they were just flat out TTK'd. So if better players have a cutoff where they stop going for the headshot, then what does it say when you have players that show higher win rates, higher skill ratings, but are also using what would be flagged as a subpar headshot preference for the players? It's not a skill thing, it's a preference. They preferentially went and waited until they had lined up a headshot, even in engagements where it would have been better to go for a body with a quick follow-up. So their higher skill in terms of their win rate, or they appear to be higher skill on paper in terms of their win rate, but they're choosing a less optimal way to use their sniper. Why? Because that TTK penalty for lining up, taking the time to line up that headshot doesn't apply to them. So it's not less optimal. That's why the sort of conflict doesn't exist for them. And that solves the conflict, right? That's why high accuracy is usually, I think, a pretty good indication of cheaters. It's not because they have higher accuracy in terms of headshots than a human player. It's because they chose to commit to the headshot, even in cases where a human would have been smarter to go for the body in a quick follow to avoid getting flinched. Anyway, that's my only point for today, is that when you're choosing weapons, keep in mind TTKs. Enemy players are going to be having about 0.5 second TTKs. You got to be able to match that. I will say in trials, I'm seeing some better use of hand cannons, because practical TTK is a thing, and practical TTK only includes like when you're exposed, so you can slide out of cover. In team shot situations, it's better. In Rumble, it's a completely different ballgame. In Rumble, you want to run your special weapon all the time. But in trials, primaries are much more effective because you're darting in and out of cover and you're trying to team shot the enemy player. So it's a completely different type of game. I'm doing way better in trials, just focusing on being exposed as minimally as possible and getting just 1 or 2 taps, not committing to the kill, but instead hoping that my teammates are going to line up a secondary or tertiary shot on the player, right? Not necessarily trying to close that shot out in one, committed stride into the lane, as I would be doing in Rumble. That's it for today, guys. Practical TTK on snipers. Consider that. Consider practical TTK on all your weapons. It's not just about the optimal TTK, but realistically, when you account for aim, when you account for readiness, when you account for ADS, what's the TTK? And is that going to be viable for Rumble? For trials, you have a little more leniency. Peak TTK, or whatever you want to call that, is probably more important. But yeah, that's it. Peace out.